Welcome back to the shop. What's wrong with your Bobcat? Well, we're just going to do an engine service on this Bobcat Doosan engine today. Even if you know how to change your oil, fill filter, air filters, you might find something useful in this video. So first thing we're going to start with is doing the engine oil change itself. There's a plate on the bottom of the frame that we take off and we pull our engine oil drain tube out of that hole, and we're going to put it in a pan. So let's go ahead and get the engine oil draining. So we've got the engine oil draining, and you can see that even though I've got the engine nice and warm, on the Bobcats usually the oil drains out super slow. So if you're having an issue with that, let me give you the first trick on how to speed that up a little bit. So to speed up the oil drain process, we're going to go ahead and pull the dipstick out. And we're going to use compressed air right in the dipstick hole. Now, I've turned my regulator way down. I've only got it about 40 psi, but I'm still going to just barely put some air in there, and the oil really starts to flow out of the drain tube much faster. Again, don't go putting 150 psi through the crankcase. It just takes a little bit to really speed up this process. Alright, so we got all the oil out of it, and here's our oil fill cap. We're going to remove that, install our funnel. Now, I haven't put the drain cap back on yet. I like to put a little oil in the crankcase, and I want to see it come out of the drain tube. So when I see fresh oil coming out of that drain tube, I'll stop and go ahead and put the cap on. Now, we're using a 10W30 oil. We're going into winter time now, and 10W30 seems to work better in these engines. Whatever oil you decide to use, make sure it's a tier 4 rated oil, or at least a CJ4. This new Bobcat oil is actually a CK4 rated, but backwards compatible. Okay. So I've got a little bit of clean, fresh engine oil coming out of the drain tube. I'm going to go ahead and cap that off. And finish filling up our crankcase. So you'll notice that the oil filter on these engines are almost upside down. So when we take it off, it's going to pour oil out of it. And you really, I don't know, I wish Bobcat would do something different, but you don't want engine oil dropping all down in your cooler and down the side of your engine block and down in there, you know, up under the engine. So here's what I do. I take an oil absorbent mat. This is kind of my secondary, and just tuck it right up under the oil filter housing. And then I use a Forma funnel. Now, if you haven't seen these are really neat. I'll try to put a link in the description. It's got a lead inner body on it, so it's moldable. You can shape it however you want to, and it'll stay there. So what I do is just make a little trough, and this probably work with cardboard too. And I try to fold that lip like that underneath the oil filter. Yep. So just like that. And I've got my catch pan right below it. You'll see how much oil comes out of here. And a lot of people just let that oil drain all down over the engine. It's a mess. I guess if you're in a shop and have a pressure washer, that's one thing, but if you don't have access to a way to clean it, why make a mess? Just take an extra step or two. Keep it clean. Just take my mat, wipe up what little excess is under there. And there you go. That easy, just an extra step to prevent making a huge mess. So let's get the new oil filter spun back on there. I'm going to screw that down. Hand tight. That's it. No more than that. That's all you need. So, alright, so we drained the oil. We've topped it off. 2 gallons of oil in this engine. Got the oil filter changed. Let's move on to the fuel system. Okay, so for the fuel filter, it's held on with 2 worm gear band clamps. First thing I like to do is, while it's still clamped in, is I like to grab the filter head, and you can spin that a little bit toward you. What that does is that kind of breaks the seal while it's still mounted. Makes it a little bit easier to get the filter off. These can be pretty tight, pretty tough to get off. Here's our fuel, our water and fuel sensor. We'll get that unplugged. And let's take our band clamps off. So now we just grab the filter head, grab the bottom of the filter, and like I said, this is a little tough. Goodness gracious. Okay, and there it is. Okay, so here's our new filter. I've got some clean engine oil here. I'm just taking a little drop, and I'm going to put around the O-rings on this. You've got an upper and a lower O-ring, and that just helps this O-ring to slide into that filter housing a little easier. You try to put it in dry, although there's fuel in there, it's tough. Just this little dab of engine oil makes a huge difference. And we're going to spin this filter on dry. We don't want to fill it up from a diesel can and risk getting contamination into the filter. This is a 3-micron filter, and any trash, dirt, dust that gets past the filter and into the injection system can cause some damage. I mean, we're running extremely tight tolerances inside that fuel system, and we want to do everything we can to keep from getting contamination inside of there. So yeah, we just spin it back on, hand tight. I've got my water and fuel sensor plugged back up. Let's get it mounted. Another thing to look for when you mount this fuel filter is keep an eye on your fuel water sensor plug here in the wires. Make sure that when you mount this, you're not you've got some clearance between the wires and anything else below it, so that you don't cause damage to your plug in there. These clamps have to be perfectly aligned. I don't know why. I think it's just obsessive compulsive disorder. But anyways, so what we'll do is, since we put the filter on dry, we can prime it with our primer bulb right here. So we're going to squeeze that about 10 or 15 times, and you're going to feel the primer start to get hard. And when it does, you're still not quite there. You want to do something else for a few minutes before starting the machine and come back and pump this bulb again, and you'll be able to tell it got soft, and you'll feel there's more air that we're trying to push through the fuel cooler and all. Okay, now for the air filters. And guys, this is really important. We want to protect your investment, and the air filters sometimes get neglected and it can cause a lot of issues. You've also got a plugged air filter warning light in the cab. And guys, don't ignore that. When you start getting codes for your air filters, keep some on hand and come back here and change them out. It doesn't take but a couple minutes. So we're going to reach around, and pop the clips off the housing, and get this housing out of our way. Now you may or may not have a tube connected down here at the bottom that it makes it really hard to get your air filter out, but that tube just slides right off. Just pull that tube off and get this housing up and out of your way. Okay, so here's our primary air filter. We're going to remove that. This one's not too bad, but yes, it has some dirt in it. And we also want to avoid blowing these out. Two reasons. High pressure compressed air, when you're blowing in here, you can cause damage to the element itself. It might not look like it, but you're putting small fine holes and tears in there, so it makes it less efficient. And also, when you're blowing it out, you got this huge dust cloud. Now dust is swirling around and it can get back inside the filter. So yeah, just best practice, change your filter when it needs to be changed. Now inside the housing, you will see there's dust and all in there. So before I pull out the secondary filter, I want to take a clean lint-free towel. It's just a little window cleaner. Just get a little damp, and I'm going to wipe out the dust from inside the filter housing here. What we want to do is just avoid, when we slide that filter back in, we want to avoid pushing dust up into the intake tube there, so anything get past the filter we're trying to prevent. Yep, so nice and clean. So now we're going to pull out our secondary filter. Here's that guy. Looks really good. Now again, I'm going to turn my rag inside out. And I'm going to wipe down where that filter sits. Okay, it's perfectly clean inside there. So now we can put our new filters back in. So that was our basic engine service. We did fuel, air, and oil. Really very straightforward. Just when you're doing this, guys, make sure that you do everything you can to prevent possible contamination getting inside this engine. Engine is very expensive. Parts are expensive. It's expensive to work on. So protect your investment and make sure that you do everything you can to keep it clean and serviced. If you bought a new machine, remember, whether it's an excavator or skid steer, Your first service is due at 50 hours. You got to break in oil in there. Make sure that at 50 hours we put an oil, a new oil filter, and change the oil and get that break-in oil out of there. And then your manual will probably recommend 500 hours for each oil change after that, but 258 hours is where I recommend changing the oil on this.